Hi, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear us just fine. This is Jeff from the Department of Education. We'll do a quick introduction around the table of who's here from the Career College Transition Division. We're here to talk about Edgar today and what we're going to be going in. But we're here in a nice window room here at the CDE looking out at the top of the trees. And on my right is
Sherry Davis from the Perkins Unit.
Good morning. This is David Stang from the Adult Ed Office.
This is Zachary, Administrator of the Perkins Office. Lori, Analyst, Perkins Office.
And so in case you're wondering, the Perkins Office is actually better known as the Career Technical Education Administrative and Management Office. So that's why we call it the Perkins Office, just in case you're wondering. It's easier. Sure. We're here. We've got about an hour and a half scheduled this morning. We've been doing workshops around the state in person. Sherry and the Adult Education Unit have been out. I think we've seen almost approximately 450 of you out on different workshops around the state, both last week and the week before. We still have a few more tomorrow and on Friday in LA, but we want to give you guys this opportunity to hear about the updates in person via the web. Is that a way possible in person via the web? No. Anyway, I did post just a moment ago in the chat box the links, and we'll be talking more about those, but if you're one of those multitaskers that wants to follow along, those are there for you and available for you. So, Edgar, how we give you Edgar? You know what Edgar is, other than those of you who've read the bottom right underneath it. Edgar is not Carl Perkins' middle name, said that before. Edgar is not the Kiowa. Edgar is the overarching federal guidance for all federal programs coming from the Department of Education for all federal pots of money. And changes, yeah, the E and WIOA. But anyways, the way I like to think of it is really some black, white, yes and no answers the Fed's put out, and then there's some things that are kind of, well, if it's framed this way or the other way, it could be yes or no. And so knowing what yeses and nos are going into it is always helpful. We played the game of Monopoly back when we were kids and played Monopoly with family, and sometimes we don't play it anymore because our families don't get along when we're getting it. But when I played Monopoly as a kid for a long time, it took me a long time to realize and get the version of Monopoly where the fine, instead of the fine going to the banker, the fine went on the middle of the table, and then we had that big pot of money on the middle of the table, and when you ended on free parking, you got money. You know, a little-known side rule of Monopoly where it's like the people get the money as opposed to the game, you know, the bank gets the money or the game gets the money. And like, oh wait, you guys that way? I didn't know that. That's the rule? Wow, I never knew that. And you know, it's not a game. You know, this is all serious impact. But just knowing what those are is kind of what our purpose in getting that information out to you guys today. That's our purpose. So we have 3 sections we're going to be talking about today in our online workshop. We're giving you an overview. We're going to be talking about some overarching financial management implications specific about some specific allowability and inventory costs, and then really looking forward and how it's changed the way we're going to be doing monitoring audits in the future. So if you think of there's financial, then there's kind of yes and no's, and there's also some monitoring audits. If you have any questions at all during the time, make sure you just type in the chat box. Sherry's here to answer and respond. David will answer for the Adult Ed perspective, and the WIOA perspective. We'll try to do that. And also, by the way, just let you know up front, we will record this and post this online so you can see it later. We will copy the questions and answers that you have and record them for later. So we want to make sure that you have opportunities to hear about this. Sophie is noting, asked the question, is this the same training as what's going to be happening tomorrow in Oakland or Friday in LA? Yes. But this morning part of the all-day training, the information that's coming in the afternoon is a little differently. So just put right in. First thing is links. I posted these in the chat box, and we'll actually come back and explore these links later on at the end. The one you want to see most, if you're interested, is the presentation link. But we will come back to this. This is where we'll come back and land at the end of our time together today. what basically happened with Edgar or with the federal government is they had different, what they circulars, governing different pots of federal money that came from the Department of Education. If you think about it, school districts aren't the only people responsible for educating, providing. There are sometimes education that happens on the K-12 side. There's education that happens on the post-secondary side. There's education that happens from public institutes, education that happens out in some other rural areas, on Bureau of Indian Affairs, those sort of things. And so all those circulars were brought together into from different ones and were placed into what they now call the super circular or Part 200. And that's what we're talking about today. Now, just all the things that apply to all those pots of money have been consolidated. There are still some that apply to us as a state and other states at the state level that are still in place, and that's what we're going to talk about here first. Part 64 of Chapter 34 are still in place, and they govern how we as a state still handle our grants. See, Alyssa, you're commenting about the links being, your links being blocked. I still don't get that as a tech person, but I get that. We will post the full links here in a little while, so just so you know. One of the things that is impacting us starting here at the outset is that in the state of the guidelines, which has to do with our programs and when programs start spending their money, when are programs substantially approvable. And for Perkins, the guidelines that we're going with is noted here in adult education for the WIA grant, WIA, is that right, David?
That's right.
Okay, are there. So we're going to talk first about Perkins and what this is impacting us. And those of you that have turned in your apps, you're familiar with this, and we've talked about this before. In looking at when it is allowable for a district to start obligating funds and allowing and be eligible to receive those funds back. Date you can start obligating funds and expect reimbursement is when it's substantially approvable in a substantially approvable form. Either when your application is approved and your superintendent clicks certify, or July 1, whichever is later. So I'm working with one of my districts, and you're getting emails from me. Those of you in the field that work with me, you're getting emails from me going, hey, here's what everything looks good. Section 1, here's Section 2. The sign-off link wasn't working. Here's this, so forth and so on. And we're working on getting the application in substantially approvable form. And then when I click everything approved, your superintendent clicks certify, it's ready to go. Now it's not July 1 yet, so you can't start spending until July 1. But that's because it's either when it's approved by the application or approved by and certified by the superintendent, or July 1, whichever is later. Now, if something were to happen that July 1 comes and goes, and we've corresponding back and forth, and it's now September 1, and August go by, and the application has still not been certified by the superintendent, Edgar certifies that your costs that you've incurred between July 1 and 1, they're not reimbursable. And so what needs to happen is that's why it's important we work together on this, getting your application reviewed and approved and ready to go before July 1 so that you can start spending your money. Important knowledge, important clarification to make sure that we're all working together on that. That's the pressure on us to get your information back. And for those of you who I have not gotten back to personally that I work with, again, this is Jeff, you should be hearing from me by the end of next week at the latest, because I want to have at least a couple weeks to work on it. Doing trainings out this week, the last few weeks has kind of sidetracked this process, even though I got emails at night from Starbucks. So anyway, from adult education perspective, I'll let David speak to this.
So with respect to adult education, we're aware that in the past some agencies have had issues having to wait for hard copies of GANs to be received. Their boards required hard copies in order for them to be able to begin obligating funds. So I wanted to make sure we make it clear and that we're transparent and explicitly out there. As the slide reads, the date the subgrant is made, the CDE posts the grant award notification again on the CDE webpage. That will be the first opportunity when agencies can begin obligating funds. Obviously, we have to wait for the budget to be approved by the legislature and for the GANs to be approved here at CDE. That will be the first opportunity. And then of course, agencies have the option to wait for hard copies of the GANs to be received. And we're working our best to get those out as soon as possible.
In topic or similar kind of process, but just slightly different. And you're going to hear this. It's going to be kind of the same sort of thing. There's the implications for Perkins and the way Perkins is looking at these things. Implications from the WIOA grant. The other thing important to note is that the fiscal unit or division here at the Department of Education is going to be looking at this to see what the implications are from a fiscal perspective. The Title I EL units or divisions are going to be looking at the same sort of thing. So you're going to be hearing some of these in unit or repetition going forward when it comes to the application of this. While I was talking, I did post the full links to those the resources in the chat window. So if you haven't, you can take a look at that while we're continuing to going forward and going on. First is the financial controls and how we look at making sure we have things in place to govern and take care of our federal grant funds. This was a slide that was shared with us when we were first looking at this, that the slide speaks for itself, but the more, it's totally true, the more attention we pay ahead of time looking at what we're doing, the more it'll save us later on. Because the application for next year hasn't been approved yet in many cases, taking a look to see what's the implications is going to save us all headache down the road when it comes to monitoring and looking back and going, oh, no way, I didn't know that. Important to look at the way we have appropriate financial management controls in are things like the federal program monitoring process, which is ongoing with the Department of Education and local districts, but also important, the fiscal audit that occurs annually in districts is also the same. It applies to that also. It applies to Office of Inspector General audit. They don't always come out, but they will come out and look at different districts in different states from time to time. And finally, the federal government will come out as just like we would come to a district and look at your Perkins. The Office of Critical Education, which used to be OVE, in Washington, D.C. will come and look at California and say, how are you looking at? And in turn, when they come out and look at us, they want to come and see districts in the same time. In adult education, there was a full visit 2 years ago. Is that correct?
That's right.
And we'll actually be back this summer in a few weeks, if I'm not mistaken, to do their check. So, David and his colleagues are in the hot seat where understand, being for those sort of visits, and this all applies to them.
Well, the other thing is, I will add, Jeff, is the fact that these single audits and our federal crime monitoring from the state level result in bringing the Office of Inspector General and federal visits to be there at the local site if both of us find something really bad. So, just saying.
And to be honest with you, too, when the feds come and look at whether it's Office of Inspector General or OVE, they want to come and visit school, too. And some maybe, well, I'm not in a destination location, I'm off here. You guys who are in destination locations, let's be honest, of course they're going to want to fly into Southern California and visit drive up the coast to see schools. You know, like this is California. But the other thing is, sometimes they'll pull some random ones. My favorite one was when they wanted to visit Black Oak Mine in California. And he was like, well, where's Black Oak Mine? Well, draw in your head where Sacramento is, draw another picture. On the picture, draw Reno, and come to Tahoe, and you know how 80 goes to Reno and 50 goes to Tahoe, and there's a middle of this is a big old triangle. And if you think about geography, there's also multiple canyons or forks of the American River that are deep canyons. You know, we're talking 800-900 feet deep, and the roads are very, very windy. In the middle of that piece of pie, with on one side, Tahoe on the other, and California at the point, it's Black Oak. And I'm like, oh, it's only 30 miles from Sacramento. Let's go visit. That'd be great. I'm like, pack time, folks. Hey, we're out there visiting Black Oak Mine. If you're from Black Oak Mine, you know what I'm talking about. So, anyway.
It's really not that bad, Jeff. I have to pipe in because I live up in that area.
Yeah, it's not that bad. But it's not like jumping and going straight up I-5. So,
It's not like going to Doris.
Yes. Yeah, thanks. So, first, one of the other things that is important to note, I'm not in Black Oak Mine by any means. It all starts and takes effect on July 1 this year. The important thing to be in mind, and that's why it's important to work on this with the application, is July 1 is when the effects, so our funds that we're spending start July, making sure we're approval July 1. Everything we talk about today goes in effect with this grant. Now, one thing to keep in the back of your head is, you know, we have already got our plans in place, and we're making plans and doing our organization for next year's federal program monitoring, and that is actually still going to be under the old EDGAR rules, because when we do monitoring, we monitor the year that we just ended, and there are some things that'll be looked at slightly different when we come to monitoring this year, especially when it comes to the way districts were chosen, which is what we'll talk about at the end. But where this all takes into effect starting July 1. There are 6 different sections in the new super circular or the new EDGAR. Many of them are the same, but different depending on what circular it was combined into. They start with definitions and general award provisions, talks about the pre- and post-award requirements, then jumps into cost principles, and finishes up with audit requirements. We're going to kind of hit on each of these. It comes to how it applies to Perkins and we owe a grant. We combined the Part 80, which was the one that applied to K-12 and adult education, that circular that applied to. You notice that many things cross over. However, they are looking at differently how we identify awards, cash management procedures, and then some of the allowability procedures. And you'll see some of those come up when we start talking specifically about what is allowable and not allowable. What's written, what isn't written. They've combined some sections. One of the things in the EDGAR is focusing more on at our budgets and looking at the way finance and grants are written and approved, and getting in more of a performance-based system and focusing on performance as opposed to just your allowance or allocation. And so it is not moving this. It has, we don't have a new Perkins Act. The act we have, Perkins started in 2008 and was supposed to be reauthorized in 2012. It's 2015. We're kind of just waiting, but we expect fully to see more performance-based metrics applied in Perkins. Things as simple as how much money do you have and how many students you're serving? What's your cost per student? And how's that affecting performance? You think of more indicators in Perkins, this is kind of what it's going to. You'd be paid for, how many students are placed in post-secondary education or employed or in the military. You think just something as simple as those of you guys that are Perkins handle the E2. Those would be our performance metrics, and tying that to funding and go forward. In adult education, you guys have already, the grant has already kind of moved to this. Dave, do you want to speak a little bit to the performance metrics and how you've already kind of moved to that?
Yeah, we have moved to this, and for the most part, agencies are already doing this kind of reporting. The next slide will address some of this, but the quarterly reporting requirements, we do that already. So from our office perspective, there isn't really a whole lot. There's not a lot of new requirements because we're already doing a lot of it.
Yeah, this move to, when it comes to monitoring and reporting and collecting information and collecting, doing claims, whether it's fiscal or performance-based, it's specifying the EDGAR, and these are new things that the full awarding agency, which would be us here at the CDE, Department of Education, can't collect information from a district more than quarterly. You know, we couldn't request reports like every 2 weeks or something like that. More than quarterly is the most, but at least annually. And when those reports are due, at the quarter, they need to be done at least 30 days after the reporting period and 90 days at the end of the reporting period. Like David, some of these things we've been doing all along. If you think those of you who handle Perkins, the fiscal claims, in, and we have 30 days to close. So fit in September 30th. You have till October 30th to get the claim in, and then we try to turn around and get it back to you in 30 days and pay that out. So this has some familiarity to it. Performance metrics, though, in defining this is, okay, so if this is going to be based on performance metrics and performing, so if we're going to be paid based on that, allocation based on what our goals are, when it those reports going forward, and this may, like I said, be something to pay attention to, what happens in the next Perkins, and what you see in the next Perkins is, look to see, did you achieve what your objectives were, and quantifying it. You know, we're going to increase the number of students that are being placed in post-secondary successfully, whether it's employment, apprenticeship, whatever it is. And if it wasn't met, why wasn't it met? You know, other information, was it cost, was it too low cost, high cost, was it too expensive, was it, not possible? Like we do this kind of a little bit in Perkins with our core indicators, but looking at this even further, they're really outlining this in the new EDGAR. There are developments. We need that part of the reporting. Were there problems and delays or adverse conditions, or were there favorable developments? Hey, we thought we were going to graduate, 80% or 8% of our students, and we actually graduated 95% of our students. That's pretty incredible as compared to everyone else. So that will be part of the performance metrics built in. The county source documentation, part 2 of this super circular, combines different sections in the old one and says, in one case, source documentation must be kept on federal orders, authorizations, obligations, unobligated balances, as expenditures, income, and interest. And all of these, you're going to come back and see that it's really, this is kind of foundational, saying, okay, what is the documentation? And that's what you'll hear from us, is how can we document what we're saying? Okay, you just need to be able to document it. Some apply to Perkins and other grants, some of them don't. Like number 7 and 8 don't really apply to us because per the reimbursement, so you already spent the money, and so there would be no reason and no way that a district would be making money in interest form on Perkins. It's not like you take an allotment down at the beginning of the year and then you spend it out and you put it in the bank and earn interest on it, so you have more to spend. Perkins is reimbursement only, so 8 doesn't really apply. Same goes, there's no policy really at the state level on that you can earn income on federal Perkins dollars. So some of these apply, some of them don't, but if you think of the other federal pots of money, sometimes this does affect you, and you should be aware of that, especially when those other programs come and talk to you about this. Part controls is basically the same as the old requirements in the old EDGAR. So again, this will be something where we're looking at this when we come and do visits even this year. This documentation in 80.20 or 200.303 says that it's important that we can maintain effective control and accountability for all funds, offering, and other assets. We need to adequately safeguard assets, and we need to use the assets solely for the authorized purpose. and talk about this more in detail when it comes to inventory and property, but the same thing goes for all other things, because it's just not talking about number 2 property, it's talking about funds. If we're for somebody's salary, this actually applies for salary too, and personal expenses. So we're paying for somebody completely to be part of support career technical education students. So an example of this would be you wanted to have a support classified person work with your CTE students so they could have extra time and extra support as they're doing career exploration so they can be successful on placement. We're down to it though, we have to be able to document that person, and we'll talk about this on salaries, that person's time supporting the CTE students as opposed to just general students or general special education students and who are not in CTE, and allocate that time and see that it's actually helping that as opposed to just helping every kid. And it's not to say we're not supposed to help every kid, but every kid is a CTE student. An important thing, and that's kind of we've been about the applications going forward. But really, bottom line, we need to have internal controls or internally in our systems out there in the school district and make sure we have controls over accountability for funds, property, assets, and guard it, and make sure the assets are used for what we say they're going to do. You know, if you built a computer lab, it's being used for the program it's intended, not being used for academic purposes. When we're not and displacing the program it's supposed to be used for. Budget 308, similar to what was before, and it talks about making sure, and we do this on visits, is comparing your expenditures with the budget amounts for each award. What we're talking here is resource codes, looking at total grants, okay, X number of dollars in Perkins, that's how much number was charged to your Perkins account, X number of dollars in salaries or materials and supplies and equipment. Yep, that was how much the POs all added up to. Making sure there's budget controls in place and matching this. And those of you that are up for going to be having an FPM hop for next year, and you're going to be in a visit, we've been making those calls and talking to you about how that's going to go. Questions popping in during there, so Sherry's been answering them and David's been answering. So keep the questions coming in. If something happens, we'll start talking about it and interrupt and answer this for everybody. So the first slide here talking about the cost principles. So we're kind of moved through this first section. We're now down to the cost, the nuts and bolts here. Part .28 change slightly the definition of a cost objective. Something that is important here we understand what cost objectives are, especially when it comes to salary costs and budgeting for Perkins purposes, and in some ways in all federal funds. But defines a cost objective as a program, function, activity, award, or organizational subdivision for what data is desired and for which provision is made to accumulate the processes and products and jobs. A lot of legal lawyer terms for, in other words, the difference cost for professional development for Perkins as compared to the difference for cost of career development as opposed to difference of cost of transportation for special populations. Those of you in Perkins, think those columns across the top of our Perkins 101A budget form. Those are cost objectives. Like I said, from instruction, professional development, to data, outside the classroom activities that are listed under career guidance, but those are outside the classroom activities, and administration costs, which are limited. So those are cost objectives. If we're going to be allocating funds, we have to document those objectives. Cost principles, general cost principles, in Part 4 or Section 104.3, that costs need to be necessary, reasonable, and allocable, conform to the federal and grant conditions. That would be Perkins for our program, and we have for the adult education program, we have and the other ones. Whatever particular other money it is. You think NCLB, that would be the federal grant terms there. And then with state and local policies, which in case, again, with Perkins, would be state plan for CTE. With education, you have an adult education plan for, there's a state adult ed plan, right?
That's right.
The principles, the policies in it. You know, that's where we define, in the state plan for CTE, that's where we define instruction, professional development, so forth and so on, and 5% on classroom activities, at least 10% on other classroom activities such as guidance and counseling and those sort of, investing in your advisory committees, make connections, expand, and then 5% for admin. And that's outlined in the state plan. That other important thing about number 3 would be ed code. Ed code would be, and local policies would be other policies around career technical education or adult education that districts, local boards make. Costs need to be consistently treated. They need to be in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Included as a match. Now, not included as a match for other federal funds. Talking about using it for a match for state funds. And able to document it adequately and just know what the document, documented somehow. So, important to show all of these, and we have to. It doesn't say all costs might be, it's all costs must be. In Ed 413, this is the first time that they've called out and very specifically defined, or one of the first times they very specifically defined and clarified salaries, lends to administrative and clerical staff, and indirect or admin or direct costs. In this section, it specifies that salaries for administrative or clerical staff should be as indirect and included in indirect unless were met. So, costs for administrators, central office, principals, those sort of things are in the indirect amount unless they fall into these categories. The first would be the costs are integral to the activity. The usuals can be specifically identified with the activity, and how to identify that in a little bit. Are explicitly included in the budget, and are not already recovered in the indirect rate. Now, direct costs as a district, when it comes time for districts and when we negotiate those with the state, the general cost of doing business of a district, of all the business services, accounting, payroll, purchasing, data even. So the cost of doing business are indirect. Now, if you have somebody outside of that, some other activities, those would be numbered indirect, so then we could go on to making sure the other three bullets are met. But anybody who's already insured in purchasing, so that when you hear, when we read back on application, going, okay, we're going to have a data person who's going to do POs. Well, we can support the cost for doing Perkins data for research and evaluation if it actually really does. But the POs is admin, and it's limited to 5%. And for total admin costs or whatever the indirect cost rate, which would be in the 7,000 category. And that government outline says, hey, you get Perkins, you can use up to 5% to administer the grant, and that's the cap on it. The rest of the administrative costs need to be covered by a district. Cost rates also, unfortunately for us in K-12, put us in a bind because indirect cost rates in a K-12 account all the costs for doing business K-12. Technical education, though, is a 9-12 activity, cases of 7-12 activity, but all those costs to do payroll and purchasing for those lower grades aren't directed. So the way we do indirect in California actually could put us in a bind for a finding down the road, and we've been warned about that, saying, okay, you need to really look at how cost rates are. Those of you that are in a union high school district, they don't apply to, but for everybody in a K-12 district, do we have two cost rates, one for K-12 or K-8 and the other one for 9-12? That's not the way that we organize them, but if you're a K-12 district and you take all that money for indirect costs and put it in indirect costs, and we're setting that up, that could put us in a position for a finding down the road because of the fact that it's allowing for costs that are for somebody to write a PO for a first grader. You know, that's not what Perkins is there for. You want to mention something real quick about the 7,000 category in adult ed?
Sure. Well, as you know, AFLA doesn't allow indirect costs, so there isn't a 7,000 op code as the note indicates there. We do have a allowance for 5% administrative, of course, but the AFLA grant doesn't have that object code.
Yeah, that's just the Perkins allows it, so for now.
Right.
Because it's in the state plan, back to slide before, the state plan said it could be taken as direct or indirect. There may be a chance that going forward it'll say, no, you can use 5% for a direct cost, so you can pay for an administrator to up to 5% for an administrator to support your CT and give it to your CT, or you can pay up to 5% of your grant for a classified staff to handle those things. Question for Debbie asking what cycle FPMs are on, and to be honest with you, Debbie, I don't know which one is A, B, or C, or D. I just know that those you guys who are up for FPMs this year, the lists have already been posted, so if you haven't noticed from your district, you can also, if you go to the CDU website, Debbie, you can search FPM. That's how I would go real quick and find out which number it is.
We're on B and D.
Or B and D? It says we're on B and D. There you go.
Okay, Elizabeth wanted this clarified. Summaries, flash benefits, and indirect, is that correct? She's making sure that you can't, like, it's kind of one or the other.
Yeah, 5% either or.
Mm-hmm.
So, percent of the grant for administrative, and administrative costs that are for costs that are for administrative or clerical staff are in 5% unless we can make sure numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 are met. That's your question, Elizabeth. 7 minutes later. On certification, and when I think about this, and we'll read this specifically here, you can read ahead while I'm talking, because of our technological world and everything we have, we're just accustomed to just clicking yes, 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 as some new software installs or new app downloads or whatever, and we're just like, yeah, whatever, I'm accepting it. You know, getting so accustomed to this now, we go into Target and we swipe our card and we scribble a thing looks sort of like a signature. It's almost like back to the old days where people used to just use an X for a signature. We don't often stop to look at what we're signing. And say Edgar here, a certification requirement that is applied, that is used when it comes to all annual and fiscal reports that happen for payments, for request payment. What put in here is this statement, and we'll read this word for word here, that it may not strike you. I'll be honest, when I looked at it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. But that's on whatever grant that we have that for the critical claim where it says, okay, the final thing that you put right above where our signature is, or right thing, that thing that pops up and you click, yes, I agree, and click the button agree, this is what we're agreeing to. Whether it's electronic or in paper, this is the certification statement for payment. Is this from Edgar? By signing this report, I certify to the best of my knowledge and belief that this report is true, complete, accurate, and the expenditures, disbursements, and cash receipts are for the purposes and objectives set forth in the terms and conditions of the award. I'm aware this is personal, that any false, fictitious, fraudulent information or omission of any material fact may subject me, criminal, civil, or administrative penalties for frauds, false statements, false claims, or otherwise. So in Perkins, if you think about those of you that work with Perkins, we have 3 levels of login for this sort of a process for us. We have superintendent login every year. With the superintendent, when the application is all finished and approved, they log in and click the certify button. So they use superintendent login to certify the application every year. They say that we're agreed to everything in here, and I'm certifying that everything is true. That's not how this goes. We also have a fiscal coordinator login, which is a login that allows someone to go into the fiscal of the Perkins report and enter information when it comes to claims and do budget revisions and move money and make adjustments, which is allowable. That person doesn't click this button. That person can still claim, but the middle login, which is the Perkins coordinator login, or who's designated as the Perkins coordinator, is the one who actually has to file the fiscal reports and narrative. And so that's the person, that's the login in our fiscal system, in the Perkins Grant Management System, who's going to be clicking on and applying this, certifying this form. So those of you that are the Perkins coordinators, this is you. And same for the other systems. Whoever clicks the button requesting the payment is going to be the one certifying this information, whichever pot of federal or whatever category of federal money we're talking about. So if there's questions or comments on this, please make sure you talk with this. Make sure you clarify this and or what you're clicking first of next year. Moving forward. Also, a lot of times we'll get the question, is this allowable or is this not allowable? And in it, they actually break down 55 different costs, and this is allowable, this isn't allowable. They also have the definitions. What is equipment, what isn't equipment? Obvious ones you'll hear about is, they'll be like, is our advisory committee costs allowable? We want to do them. For advisory committee costs are not allowable. Are alcohol allowable? No, actually alcohol isn't. That's a pretty obvious one. Is lobbying allowable? No, it isn't. And so it tells you either one way or the other, ones that are very specifically clarified. And so if you're wanting to know if something is allowable or not, this is one of the first places you can start at, is looking at these 55 items of cost to see what you do. I see. Is market or what is it? Advertising costs allowable? And there are some things that are allowable, but they also very clearly say the things that aren't allowable, Elizabeth. So the way your question, right, is marketing swag allowable? Things that I would think that's probably in the non-allowable cost in terms of that. So. Anyway, this is an important thing to look at and see and check and read up on it. That would be under advertising costs. So if for us an in-person training, we would take a break right now, but since we're not in person and we're here, let's just keep powering on. If you want a break, let's all stop for a second, breathe, but we'll just keep going. Moving on into the circulars with respect to time and effort. I mentioned this briefly when we were talking about administrative and clerical staff and how do we support time and efforts or personnel costs. They took what used to be before and come forward when they were talking about for personnel, and they've added a new section called Stand for Documentation of Personnel Expenses. And you who like federal acronyms and we're wondering why we haven't called it, I don't know if they're going to call the acronym for Standards for Documentation of Personnel Expenses. I'm trying to figure out SDPE, I don't know. The only thing I've been able to start to see is that they're starting to refer to them still as time distribution records or PARs. But so if we're using and paying for personnel, and like I said, this personnel at all, any 1,000 or 2,000, we time distribution records. Okay, allocation has to be, and it can't just be. We'll talk about what it used to be and what it is going forward, starting July 1. The most important critical piece of it is we have to demonstrate allocability, and back to allocability to the cost objective. So just federal, non-federal, it's allocability down to the cost objective. So again, back to you guys who do Perkins, allocability, the time I spent doing instruction, the time I spent doing professional development, the time I spent doing curriculum development, the time I spent doing data, so forth and so on. They verify it here to those two sections, whether it's whole or part, whether it's used for match or cost. So if someone's being used, say we're matching some federal dollars, there's a requirement of federal dollars to say, okay, we're going to match it, so we're going to use in-kind costs. That person who's used it as in-kind would have to meet these requirements. What we're looking at now is what's called A87, which specified if it's semi-annual certifications for people who work on a single cost objective, which is done every 6 months. And that, so if someone it's only for out of funds to do PD, only pay for out of federal funds to do in curriculum development. Wholly complete, that's all they do, 3 hours of every day, annual certification. If someone is working on multiple cost objectives, though, for Perkins, then we're doing monthly personnel activity reports that are signed after the fact, account for the total activity, and are monthly, or pay period. So those visits we're coming out on this year. Next year, when we get salaries, whether it's 1,000, 2,000, we're looking at these two, this in case, but everybody who's starting July 1, if you have salaries built in your Perkins grant, there's a new rule that applies. The rule says that charges to salaries have to be based on words that accurately reflect the work performed. This again is in section 430. They have to be supported by a system of internal controls that provide reasonable assurance where the charges are accurate, allowable, and allocated. They incorporate in the official records, in other words, the sheets or whatever uses in a district, and they reasonably reflect the total activity for which the employee is compensated. So let me give you an narrative of how this might work. Everyone is salary when it comes to us here at the CDE. The consultant level, we're salaried employees. Okay, it's just like teacher salaries. The internal controls of the CDE, though, is that everybody, regardless of classification, does a time sheet every month that lists salary based on hours with respect to our activity. Completely, this is Jeff here. I'm completely 100% paid for out of Perkins to do technical assistance for districts and support districts. That's one of the things that is our guidance. And so the only thing we do is Perkins technical assistance. I mean, that's the whole goal here. I don't think any of us split funded here. You're not split funded. So we're all do just Perkins. Okay. However, there's a whole state thing called the Career Pathways Trust grants. You guys, most of you are familiar with that. And one of the things they needed done is they needed some people, that didn't happen in our unit, but they needed some people to read the grants. And for 2.5 days that it took me to read the grants, where I went off into a room somewhere and put some headphones on and read the grants and hold up for those rooms, my time accounting on my timesheet, my payroll thing, shows another budget code and that time I spent on it. It's official records you can see, and it's charged out. You can see that it was charged after fact at the end of March and early April. I spent 2.5 days working on reading Pathways Trust grants and scoring Pathways Trust grants. And so it's just what we have to do and be able to document our time that was outside of Perkins and doing Pathways Trust grants.
So Ben, for a second. So I saw a question about the terminology being used with respect to Perkins and CTE and adult ed, and the idea that some people are being confused. From the ed side of things, there isn't a lot that has changed with respect to what requirements are going to be asked of the adult ed providers. Where our change is, I'm going to try to spin and talk about them during the course of the webinar, but we will also be providing guidance in the future about those changes. It's not a gotcha process. When we later on in the webinar, we'll talk about risk factors for when we will be doing FPMs in a cyclical nature that the FPM office now bases its identification of agencies who will be reviewed. We're going to be moving to a risk factor process. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but it's a similar process that the feds use to reviews of categorical programs here at CDE. One of those risk factors, for example, is having new personnel. The adult ed office has a new director. Well, I haven't had a chance to speak to it well, but that's one of the reasons why the feds come to visit when you have new personnel, such as a new director. It was why we were visited several years back with Pat Terry, among other reasons. But that's just an example of the type of risk factors. In our last visit, one of the things that the feds noted about the adult ed office was that we hadn't provided as much guidance as we could have, that we should have. And so going forward, just like the Perkins office and CTE, to be transparent and make sure we provide the guidance necessary for you to be in compliance with these regulations. We're not to catch anybody, to try to get money back. We want the money to go out and to be used. So to get to your question about being confused, I'll try to jump in here where we can, but going forward, please be assured that we will do best to provide guidance and make sure when you have questions, there's somebody to answer them for you. And that goes for the FPM process as well.
Yeah, I think, and that's the thing. I think a lot of us are looking at this for the first time here at our level and sharing it with you at your level. You know, we see this information where they call out and they very specifically say, okay, if you're an administrator or clerical staff, this is how you should be treated and indirect or as admin. If you're going to use salaries, these are the requirements, so that then you and I on the side, and David in his districts, he can spend us, okay, so I have an administrator or clerical staff that I want to support. How do I make sure my documentation's in the right place so that it doesn't become a gotcha? And that's the boat we want to be in, because we can very clearly say, this is what Edgar says, so if we want to do it, decide that we don't want to do that, then that's, you don't want to use your funds that way, that's fine also. So, okay. But these with respect to personnel expenses do apply to all federal pots of money, regardless of
okay, let me ask you this. Maria has this question. Is there a specific time report to log out paid to staff members? We have samples in the Edgar. Yeah, there's no template per se, but there's some districts that already have this down and been doing it. So just email your consultant, perhaps, Maria, to see if they have a sample they could share with you. Would be my
and the number one thing is it should be whatever is used in your internal payroll system to start with. So,
but some of them were saying they only do things online; they don't have anything documented.
Yeah. So if there's nothing in the internal payroll system, then we have to get to the next level. But it should be a part of your internal controls. That's the first part here, where it says it's incorporated in official records. Something that just the program would keep. It's the official records that go along with timekeeping. So, for it's just a couple more slides here, and then we'll keep answering questions as they pop up. Estimates. So we just say, I think I spend this much time on Pathways Trust versus Perkins. It needs to be based on the actual amount if the federal dollars are involved. If there is nothing, which I think is what Sherry was just mentioning, if there's no records at all and they don't meet the new standards, then you have to, Department of Education may require to somehow support it, but they don't define what it is, so we'd have to work that out, but it still needs to be part of the official records and meet the requirements. There's a memo from 2012 where we got the guidance, but it's 2012 and it's with the old Edgar, so we'll see what they give us when it comes to new Edgar. It just comes down to the feds are completely aware of the fact that things are tight, and so they're concerned that money is still being used in a supplemental form as opposed to supplanting cut staplers. And so it's like, okay, we can do it, but we just need to support it. Questions, stipends to teachers who supervise student organizations. You know, stipends, those would be as long as it's documented and you can account for it and it's in line with other stipends. Somebody else mentioned subs. You know, subs are pretty easy because there's a timesheet. A sub shows up and does a timesheet, so those are pretty easy. teachers doing, and a teacher do PD, there's a sign-in sheet. You know, there's documentation built in on that. This is the kind of like the person who's all of their salary is attached to some federal pot of money. That's where this comes in alignment here.
Or even split between multiple.
Yeah, so all or part of their money is divided up between multiple different. And interesting, someone was saying they had one where the person was responsible. One of the trainings, the person was responsible for transportation and food service. You know, one of the measures in that was responsible, and they wanted to allocate their time between those two. And you're like, well, how do you document that, and how do you from transportation calls, I got to go spend some time working on really a transportation issue. Otherwise, I'm working on food services issues, and so you know you can't split it 50-50 because it's not 4 hours of each day. So it's make sure showing that this is supplemental funds. So any other come up with salaries and personnel expenses will come back. Like I said, time distribution ratios are a big deal. If you've chosen to put that in any of your grants, just be aware of these. If you're decided, hey, no, that we're getting some other funds, we're going to put salaries in a different thing and focus Perkins or Adult Ed or whatever the funds on other, that's fine. So, inventory, we're going to talk about here for a second. This is not new. Talks about the fact that we must have adequate controls in place to account for location, custody, and security of equipment. You know, we know that's difficult, but it's still a requirement. We can't just leave rooms wide open. In the EDGAR, they define what equipment is, and we'll talk specifically about that more here in a minute. But they do talk and specify use disposition policy. Shifts is allowed as long as it's not interfering with the primary objective of the program. If there are shared use going on, the priorities are the projects supported by the same agency, federal agency, projects supported by other federal agency and non-federal programs. And then they talk about you can trade in information without recourse. Just practical answer here, or practical application here is think about the computer lab. You know, whatever pot of money to build a computer lab, the first #1 priority to use the computer lab would be the program that built it. If it was used and, 50-50 of these funds, the program gets the #1 priority. What we want to have happen and see what happened here in California during last year's SBAC testing administration. There was a computer, and some of you guys maybe haven't looked to see who's online today, but the computer lab at a high school that had an engineering class in it, and the students in the engineering class, the school used that lab for the SBAC that morning, so the students were down to the computer lab in the library because there were more computers down up there or something, I don't know what it was, but they were displaced and they couldn't run their software. Of course, those of you who are CT involved and know what an engineering kid, those kind of that type of personality is, they, of course, phone, sent some emails, sent some tweets, and contacted the superintendent of public instruction here in Sacramento and said, hey, our CT engineering class was kicked out to run the SBAC. What's up with that? That's not cool. That's not fair. So then, of course, then we get the call down here. Okay, anybody know what's going on? And then the school gets the call. How come your engineering class is being displaced from the SBAC? There's a whole bunch of money to build SBAC facilities. Engineering class needs to run it first. That's what we don't want to have happen. Where it happened is, say, a high school program builds a facility and they use it during the day, and they use partly some Adult Ed money to do it, and then at night when the students aren't using it from the high school, then the adult program uses it at night. That would be the same agency with other federal product money using it, and the day that the
CT is a prep period and another class wants to use it.
Yeah,
that's fine.
That's fine. And then after school on weekends, the Boys and Girls Club wants to come and use it. That's fine, as long as it doesn't displace and it follows the priorities of the use of equipment. Again, equipment we'll talk about what the definition of it is from the Fed's perspective versus the state perspective versus everything others. You do note, in person, we allow capital outlay, and David, you can talk about your object.
Yeah, just as the note says there, AFLA doesn't allow equipment purchases. Not to say that you can't buy computers. You can buy computers. It falls into the supply category. But the AFLA program does not have a 6,000 object code.
And so it would be capital outlay. So, verifying that. The Feds define anything over 5,000 as equipment. Anything under 5,000, so $4,999 or less per item, is technically supplies, but it still needs, back to this slide here, we have to still keep location, custody, and security of it. So what it's saying is, though, is you still need to demonstrate allocability and safety for anything, even if it's not, supplies or even not equipment over 5,000. Now, it's convenient for us here in California because we know the Ed Code defines for us $5 is over is equipment should be inventoried. And in our workshops this last week, someone from the community college clarified that they actually clarify that $200 or more is a $200 or more item is equipment and should be inventoried. So they take it down even a step further and say anything $200 or more needs to be inventoried, which is maybe that's community college wide or if that was just their community college, but that was an interesting thing to find out and get feedback on. However, all that to say, define this new definition here, and anytime the Feds put in a definition, I always pay attention here. Demonstrating allocability and location and use of it. They use computing devices for the first time. And devices as defined by the Feds are machines, like David was just saying, machines used to acquire, store, analyze, process data or other information electronically. Accessories like printing, transmitting, receiving, and storing information, those little servers. All the things, even if they are, they're term supplies, if they're less than 5,000, if you think about it, it'd be pretty tough to find a computer, a single computing item, unless you get into some sort of large-scale networking device that costs more than $5,000. But so it would be equipment. Most everything would be considered supplies in the supply category, and that's what we do in our budgeting. It shows up in the 4,000 category. But it's important to pay attention to the fact that they're calling this out because the line is Section B4 of this, Section 2, is regardless of cost, we must maintain effective control and safeguard assets to ensure they're used solely for authorized purposes. Back to the computer lab and the engineering class and the SBAC test. So it's important that we make sure we support that and track it regardless, even if it's a $200 video camera for a video production class. We still need to track and maintain it and safeguard and ensure that it's using a way to prove that and provide that for evidence. And that's
as in the old Edgar, anything highly pilferable.
Yeah.
So if you can go in those backpacks, you better be able to keep track of them.
That's what you always hear is pilferable items. So just over $5,000, it's everything safeguard control regardless of cost. So just practically for Perkins purposes here, inventory, our monitoring instrument, and for Perkins inventory, and you might some of you have already seen this before, it specifies in Ed Code and in the old Edgar what things need to happen when it comes to what needs to be part of the historical inventory. And the key is it's a historical inventory. It's not a inventory last year. It's a historical inventory of all things purchased with federal dollars. The rest we maintained, including all items in there of location, use, condition, whether it was split funded, partially, or whole, has to be taken at least every 2-year basis. This number is where we talk about the internal control of the control system to ensure that everything is preventing loss, damage, or theft, and then investigating it. So that would be the $200 camera. And also disposition procedures. last 3 years in the application, if you go back into PGMS and you notice that, there's a box that checks that says, okay, we have an inventory system that has this. We checked it last year, the year before, and then again this year. We have an inventory system that put in place that has these things. And as long as we were doing FPMs, before that CPMs and CCRs, even before that, inventory's been a thing. So it's like you want to be able to track all the equipment that is being purchased and supplies with federal dollars. What there are times when, for various reasons, there is no inventory control system. There's no tracking of it. So it's the NIGR in this section 331 specifies that if a district does not, a local entity does not have an inventory control system in place that meets the requirements, applications to spend Perkins funds in 4,000, which would be supplies and materials, or 6,000 capital outlay, can't and will not be approved until evidence is provided to the CDE that it is in place. Not the grant is going to be withheld completely, but the ability to spend it on this so it can be tracked will not happen. Because one of the things that an anecdotal story was there was a district who back somewhere purchased something like 5,000 iPod touches, or some gigantic group of iPod touches with a different pot of money than Perkins, and put in a library for students to use so they could have 21st century learning. When they came out to find those 5,000 or however many iPod touches, even a scanner code from the library, they could find a small percentage, like 5% of those iPod touches. The rest of them had just disappeared into the city with which they had been checked. And $200 iPod touches, what do we care? Well, the program you do care. And so that money, all the cost for all those iPod touches actually had to be remitted back through the school, through the state to the federal government. They didn't have an inventory control system in place to track those iPod touches. So
kind of goes back to a side question that pilfer. Usually it's the electronics, your digital cameras, camcorders, lenses, things like that we're talking about, the highly pilfer laptops, netbooks, tablets, whatever, because students don't want to take a hammer and a pair of pliers home. Probably, could be, yes. There needs to be a classroom check-in, check-out procedure that the teacher has in place to show how things go out and how they come back in, which is part of having an inventory. So you know the procedure, your student checked it out and which one returned, et cetera. So it's kind of classroom controlled at that point.
And like I said, we've been checking our boxes that say we have an inventory system in place, and if it comes down to it where you don't have an inventory system because of whatever reason, now time to make sure that is coming into compliance, because starting with next year's audit, this will be when we have to hold to this level of this accountability.
It gives us a little more, I guess, support from the feds and a little more teeth, so you guys have to quit telling us you're doing something and you're not.
So, transitioning to audits, a couple of overarching concepts here with audits, and we got just under 20, or just about 20 minutes to go, so thanks for hanging in there. This is the good news. Audits, when it comes to storing information, Paper Protection Act is saying that if their records are electronic and they can't be altered, we don't need to keep paper copies anymore. And it's 3 years worth of documentation if there's no issues. If there's issues, it could be longer than 3 years. 3 years if there's no issues, as opposed to 5. Now, specification for their official records and electronics is that they substituted for copies, provided that you're periodically reviewing them and making sure that the electronic files don't disappear. There's safeguards against alterations, like a scanned PDF that can't be updated, and that they remain readable. Thinking back to the what happens to a document when it's scanned or faxed multiple times. The reading just gets more and more and more. You're like, what does that say? And especially if the text is really small. So it needs to be readable. Check every once in a while, making sure that things don't disappear, and then maybe it can't be altered. That's an important piece. So for records, if we have those electronic, we're okay with it. The C must monitor subrecipients to make sure there's compliance, and monitoring must include programmatic reports, ensuring that action is taking place if there's something going on, and provide management decisions on audit findings. New monitoring is going to be, and David mentioned this a little bit earlier, is bringing in the concept of risk. Assessment of risk, which means that we're looking at, we'll talk about what those risk factors are, and those help us ensure proper accountability and compliance. And risk could be training and technical assistance, or on-site reviews, or on agreements, actually talking back like with the inventory, saying, okay, we couldn't find the inventory system, so we can still have Perkins or still have WIA, but until you have one in place, we can't buy any more computers. This is not right of any of us here, but when there are issues that arise, it is required that the CD takes action when there's non-compliance. And non-compliance could include withhold cash payments, disassign part of the cost, suspend either part of the whole award, recommending that the agency be suspended so they don't participate in whatever program, withholding further awards or other remedies that are legally available. Here in the room, and I'll speak, I'm pretty sure for every one of us, got into this job to be consultants to get in this mode. We all joined this unit. I mean, I joined the unit because I wanted to be able to provide technical assistance and understanding to the program so that we all stay out of this mode. I mean, none of us are auditors. This is where I feel like let's go in and get money, and like David said, take money back. That's the last thing we want to see. We want to see money helping programs. Our goal is to have students be trained and employed in California, whether it's high school or adult.
Right, and I can speak. I know Christy just joined us, our other consultant, but I know all of us have been out trying to work with you guys and just even coming by and seeing your program, seeing your teachers, and trying to help you and got this information so that we were all on the right track and not giving that gotcha, as David mentioned earlier, because that's not what we're in it for. We want to see you guys thrive and survive and grow, so we don't be challenging you.
Yeah. So look forward, and this is what we're kind of in development for, because when it comes to federal program monitoring and how we do monitoring going forward in the future, in the 4-year cycle that we kind of have done, which is then everybody's in a 4-year cycle, so you divide up into 4s, and then you divide people the same out of a hat based on some other factors. Risk to be, and how that's our primary goal here, our primary influence here. It's monitoring. It'll be interesting to see how that is a coordinated effort here at CDE, though, because there's a lot of unknowns. One of the first steps, though, for us is to understand what are the proposed risk factors for each of our programs, and then how does that get approved, and how do those become the overarching risk factors for the education for federal funds. They list 4 of them in EDGAR itself. The first one is the extent and results of the last single audit which happened. To be honest with you, look at a lot of single audit findings. They often have to do with accounting, to be honest with you, and the fact that PARs aren't in place. And if you look back at your districts, you can see what your last single audit findings were. There were a lot of them, a few of them. You know, if there were PAR or accounting time distribution at record findings in the last single audit, that should be an indication that there would probably be one with your federal funds too. Per percent of findings in the last FPM. You know, how many we have 9 items in Perkins. How many of the 9 were they the big ones? New personnel, both from the top to the bottom of the support, both at the local and also the state level, you know, and also local agencies' prior experience with federal awards. That's referring to if there was another organization that was come in and offer adult education or technical education or whichever other program. Think of the faith-based organizations that sometimes offer ESL classes and they use programs and they've never received federal money before because they're a nonprofit. That's what that's referring to. Most and probably most of you guys who are on the call here are coming from a school district or a local agency, whether it's the high school or community college. And so this is not referring to you because we've handled federal money a lot before. But sometimes you'll have an organization that comes in and they're brand new to the federal game. It did Perkins. We looked at a few things and kind of talked about it and got some feedback. And this would be great for you to download and give us feedback on these next few bullets from your perspective. Some risks that we're considering are, number one, percent of goal code 3800 from resource code 3550 or Perkins. What it means is goal code 3800 is the goal code for your financial system for all secondary CTE expenditures. ROP goal code and other goal codes, but thing you're spending on secondary CTE in the budget that you can show how much of it is Perkins and how much of it is general fund. How much is a different group of money. So you can see is the only money going into the programs Perkins, or is there local money going into it? How is your accounting system set up? Qualified teachers, the percent number of CTE teachers without a credential. And this one has also gotten hard for us in the last couple of years with everything that's been going on across the state. There's been a lot of CTE teachers who've had their CTE teacher credential expire, and there's not been anybody checking on it. It was a finding that was more common than I would have thought this year when we were on our visits. And you talk to the teacher, I said, did you know your credential expired? They're like, no, I didn't even know. And so understanding that, and CTE class needs to be taught by a CTE teacher just like anything else. Here's where they're accurate and reliable data, and just year to year, showing, okay, 1 year we have 2,000 students, next year we have 8,000 students, next year we have 5,000 students, what's the accurate number? Whether it comes to, and there's a whole conversation this afternoon on the,
I have 1,000 students total at school.
Yeah, pad, so that's a whole separate thing, but just see those, because you do compare just simple numbers, and take the number of students divided by number of teachers you have. So how many FTE does it have? Do we have? Wow, that many teachers. Attendance to technical assistance training. Everybody's been on this webinar. You've been got downloads, so therefore you're less risky. So congratulations to all of you. Since last FPM, to be honest with you, this bullet here is one of the reasons why California is risky for Perkins. We haven't had a state visit since 2008, so we're risky because they haven't been out. That's one that we are risky for. Seat findings versus other findings. For the Perkins allocated to salaries. Yes, this was one that was mentioned. The cost per student, CT students from Perkins. If you take the total amount of Perkins you have divided by the number of students you serve, what would be the cost? And so, to be able to take a look at these, give us some feedback on these. Just big picture is we'll be finalizing these as consultants and as a unit, getting approval from our manager, and then on up to the state director, which would be Michael, and then I'm sure it's going to have to go on up to the deputy level and even the superintendent level, where all the federal programs are going to be needing to propose their risks, and that's happening this summer. We start on our monitoring for career in late September and hit the road running till Christmas. And by the time that ends, then we also
February,
and then we have a little break in January. We're not all out. Sherry's out, and a few of us are out. But then then for February we're all for sure out again. And at that time we will be needing to pick the office will be needing to select who's going to be up for visits next year. So if we're still talking about this at Christmas time, it would not be ample time to be approved, make it a approved process. So there's work we have to do over the next few months to get these all finalized, get feedback from you, and then get this part of in there. What I think we're going to have to do is figure out a way to look at everybody who's visits and coordinate those so that we're not showing up 1 week and then adult ed showing up the week after and then Title I showing up the week after, a month later. That's not fair. So any feedback on these, please email those to your consultant so we can have that for you guys. If you're like, no way, there's no way we can do this, or that makes no sense, or hey, what have you thought about this? That would be good.
Well, we have to add, if you give us a hard time, you might be high risk.
Yeah. Adult risk factors, David?
So, the PERC office, their attempts to be overachievers, already has their proposed risk factors published. But we aren't really, these are some proposed risk factors that, frankly, a few consultants have talked about in the office. But the fact of the matter is, as Jeff alluded to, all categorical programs in the building are having to have this conversation. We have in our unit yet, the adult ed office, there are the factors that we're considering. There are other changes in the FPM office taking place. So these pros risk factors are that the feds suggest, and they, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, is that they consider when they review states. So it makes sense in some ways to use some of these same suggested risk factors. The extent and results of the last single audit. Well, if an agency were done an audit and had some things needed to be resolved, of course it would make sense that we would want to go out and make sure those things were taking place, those improvements. Number and percent of findings in the last federal program. Likewise, if a program had more few findings, we would be it would behoove us to go out and make sure that the resolutions for those findings were being implemented. New personnel, as I mentioned, we've been reviewed now, or we will have been reviewed twice in 2 years. When the Fed come out in July, August of this year, and we think that's based in part because we've had 2 directors in the last several years. The agency's prior experience with federal awards, which though is reasonable. We've experienced a lot of new administrators and new programs with the open competition last year for AFLA funding. Programs that just haven't been familiar with implementing AFLA program funds. Questions about their budgets. So this might be another area where that might be used as a risk factor in determining which agencies we visit. And the Federals 4 and 5, of course, and data changes year to year, continuous program improvement, which relate to tables 4 and 5, which would reflect that type of improvement, and the years since last federal program review. And honestly, I to the extent that I'm aware of, some of these factors are what the FPM office has used in their cyclical process. It's not just every 4 years for every agency. But more of these types of risk factors will be what we're looking at and what the adult ed office will be talking about. But again, it says that the Perkins office is soliciting your feedback around these risk factors. We will also be soliciting feedback to get your on these types of risk factors and additional ones that we're considering.
The hope is these will all be put into effect, and districts will be ranked based on risk, medium risk, or low risk. For our programs and most programs, just for practicality's sake, there will be probably 30 reviews that will be part of visits. It's still a round number for us with Perkins. Some programs have more staff and supports, so there might be more. Medium risk, it would be the ones considered to do a paper online review, and we're looking at ways to how do we do online reviews for CTE and require attendance to trainings, like a on-site review. And low risk districts would be ones where it's like, hey, you need to come to trainings and receive technical assistance, be part of online sort of trainings and activities. So understanding these ahead of time, we hope will help you guys alleviate stress, and being a part of this will hopefully help you alleviate the stress. Webinar are the links here that I was going to talk to you about, and I don't know, to be honest with you, if I can be able to pull these open, and plus we're getting close on time. The links for the web pages are listed. Why is it not? My screen is high risk, medium risk, low risk, and the links. The first one, the Edgar web page, when it changes here, can you guys change the screen on yours?
Stuck there. There it is. Is that what you want, question?
No,
Back. Okay.
we provided these at the beginning, and we also put them in the chat box. The links, the first one is to the overarching, there it goes, it finally changed. The overarching website for Edgar, which is the online resources that have each thing and it's searchable. It's just all the different hyperlinks. If you want to purchase a paper copy of the book, the first link under purchase is the federal guidelines where you can purchase it for $8. If you want the copy that the lawyer gave us, it's like $50. That's on the second link. At purchase, download the actual register that the federal government put out on December 26th, I believe, of 2013. Is that, and I would expect an actual full Edgar PDF that we'll be able to download sometime in the future. And the Edgar presentation folder, the last one, is actually a link to the Google folder. You can see all of the files that the presentation files that we've talked about today, including our notes. So those are there for you if you want to share and be able to get information from us and use it for whatever your resources. It's 11:27 and we have 3 more minutes. We're supposed to be till 11:30, so we've timed it pretty closely. We will stick around and ask questions and help you out. If you have any, we will also be seeing some of you, though, that are going to be there in Oakland tomorrow. I'll see some of you there with Shadidi, and I never can say Shadidi's last name.
CMI.
CMI? CMI. And Sherry will see some of others down in LA on with Diane, right?
With Diane, Cliff, and then Saturday morning. They're doing their afternoon adult session Friday afternoon. I won't be doing CT Perkins till Saturday morning.
So, anyway, we appreciate you guys being a part of this. Hopefully, by sharing this information, you're going to be ahead of the game. We're here to help us, everybody stay ahead of the game and help us all stay out of hot water. That's our goal. And so, we appreciate you being a part of this.
Can you go back to the web address links again? Somebody was writing them down.
They're also in the chat box. The complete addresses are in the chat box if you look at that on the left. Okay. Anyway, part of it, appreciate you guys being here. We'll stick around, but keep asking questions as they pop up. So, and thank you for everything you guys do in for and adult education out there in California. That was actually just one final comment from me, and then I'll let anybody else pipe in. There's being across the state that CTE and adult education, all these programs are just gone. You know, CTE's dead, adult ed's dead. But it was evident to me over the last week doing the trainings and before that it's not. There's still incredible things being done. Seeing the number of dedicated CTE and Perkins and adult ed administrators still doing their thing in spite of it all was really, really to me, and it was I was like, it was something that it was a way to see how much is going on across the state to serve the students in California is great. So really appreciate what you do so much for that. Let's have other comments.
I'm just trying to get some questions here.
So, if you have questions, jump in. Otherwise, we will see you soon.
Yes, thank you all for doing this.